Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at biblical principles of success and happy marriage,
Okay.
two sources that you provided to us.
Yeah.
And on the surface, they seem very different, right? One's about, achieving success in life, and the other's about building a strong marriage from a Christian perspective.
Right.
But we're here to kind of dig beneath the surface and see if maybe there are some unexpected connections or maybe even some sort of, underlying principles that connect these two seemingly disparate topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting to me is how both of these sources really grapple with that question of, what does it truly mean to live a fulfilling life? What does success really look like?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they approach it from, obviously different angles, but there's a lot of common ground there.
Yeah. So let's jump into that first big theme that kind of jumped out at me as I was going through these sources. And it was this idea of like defining true success.
Okay.
So biblical principles of success really emphasizes that true success. The author calls it good success.
Right.
It's not about, the outward trappings of success, right? It's
Yeah.
not about the fancy cars or the big house or,
Yeah.
all of those things.
Mm.
It's really about aligning yourself with God's will and living a life that's in accordance with biblical principles.
And he makes a really interesting point in the book. He compares it to a Christmas tree.
Oh, wow.
You can have this beautiful Christmas tree all decorated and tinsel and lights and ornaments.
Yeah.
But if you don't have anything underneath it, it's just kind of an empty shell, right?
Yeah.
So you can have all the outward appearance of success, but if you don't have that inner transformation,
Yeah.
if you're not aligned with God's will, it's all kind of meaningless.
But isn't there a danger in kind of dismissing outward success altogether? I mean,
Sure.
accomplishments and achievements can be a reflection of hard work and talent and
Absolutely. And I don't think the author is saying that we should, completely disregard those things.
yeah.
It's more that they need to be grounded in something deeper, right?
Huh.
Like the foundation needs to be solid,
Yeah.
and that foundation is, a relationship with God and alignment with his principles.
So it's not that outward success is bad, it's just that it can't be the end goal.
Right. Okay.
And the author, he uses the example of the Laodicean church from the book of Revelation, right? Where they were wealthy
Yeah.
and they were, self-sufficient, but they were rebuked for being spiritually impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a cautionary tale, right?
It is. Yeah.
Like you can have all the things that the
Yeah.
world tells you need,
Right.
but if you're lacking that spiritual depth, then
You're missing the point.
you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about, how much we're always talking about like information overload and like,
Right.
really trying to like pare down and focus on what truly matters.
Yeah. And this is a great reminder that, what truly matters is that inner transformation, that alignment with God's will.
Right. And it's interesting because that same emphasis on like inner transformation over outward appearances, it's also reflected in happy marriage.
Oh, absolutely.
Where success in marriage is presented as, this journey of companionship and mutual support and spiritual growth within the context of marriage.
Right. And they really emphasize the importance of choosing the right partner,
Right.
with God's guidance,
Yeah.
that's really the foundation for a successful marriage.
And happy marriage has this really thought-provoking editorial on purity
Oh, yeah.
that emphasizes how, decisions that we make early on
Right.
can have like a ripple effect throughout our lives.
Absolutely. They dive deep into, not just physical purity,
Yeah.
but also purity of our thoughts and our intentions and our emotional attachments.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
So it's this idea that like building a strong foundation
Mm-hmm.
is key to long-term success,
Yeah.
whether it's in our personal lives or relationships. And it made me think back to biblical principles of success and
Wow.
how the author uses the Israelites' journey through the wilderness
Oh, yeah.
as like this example of this process of refinement.
Right. They spent 40 years wandering in the desert, and it wasn't a punishment.
Right.
It was a period of preparation.
Right.
God was using that time to teach them reliance on him,
Yeah.
to develop their character,
Yeah.
to prepare them to enter the promised land.
So even though these books are talking about, different types of success,
Mm-hmm.
one's focused on individual growth, one's focused on marriage,
Right.
they're both highlighting this importance of inner transformation and alignment with God's principles
Absolutely.
as like the key to a truly fulfilling life.
And they both really challenge us to look beyond the superficial
Yeah.
and to consider what truly matters
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things.
And that, I think, brings us to a really crucial question for you listening. Like, how do you define true success? And are your actions aligning with that definition?
That's a great question to think about.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind as we move into our next theme.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, right, like align your actions, but
Mhm.
how do you actually do that?
Right. Like, how do we bridge that gap between our ideals and our daily lives?
Yeah, and I think that's where this next theme that emerged from these sources becomes so crucial.
Okay.
It's the importance of patience and attitude.
Oh, yeah.
Both biblical principles of success and happy marriage, they highlight these qualities as being absolutely essential
Mm-hmm.
for navigating challenges,
Right.
whether it's in your personal life or in your relationship.
Well, especially in relationships,
And then,
right? Like anybody who's been married for any length of time knows
totally,
patience is key.
you need a lot of it.
You need a lot of it, yeah.
And biblical principles of success, it really dives into this idea of waiting on God's timing. Through the story of King David, he had to wait years
Mm-hmm.
before he finally became king.
Yeah.
And during that time, he faced all sorts of obstacles.
Betrayals
Real
and deception and
rejection and like all these things.
yeah, he was on the run.
He was on the run.
He's hiding in caves.
It was intense. And, it's this powerful example of how the test of time, as the author calls it, can be crucial
Yeah.
for developing the character and resilience,
Mm-hmm.
that we need to succeed.
Like it's not wasted time.
It's not wasted time. And
Right.
it's not just about like passively waiting around.
No, it's about actively preparing.
It's about like,
Right.
okay, God, I'm in this waiting period. What do you want me to learn?
Right. What am I supposed to be doing?
What am I supposed to be working on?
Exactly.
What character qualities
Mm.
do I need to develop during this time?
And how can I maintain a positive attitude
Yes.
through all of this? Because that's not easy
Not at all.
when you're, facing those kinds of challenges.
And that reminds me of a quote from Happy Marriage.
Okay.
It says, "A wise man changeth his mind 7 times in a day, but a fool never."
Oh, I like that.
Isn't that good?
Yeah.
And it's really highlighting the importance of humility
Mm-hmm.
and flexibility,
Yeah.
especially in relationships.
Right. Because we can get so caught up
Oh, my goodness.
in our own way of seeing things
Yes.
that we miss, the opportunity to learn and grow
From the other person's perspective.
from the other person. Yeah, exactly.
And so it's this reminder that like sometimes being right isn't as important
Yeah.
as understanding
steering the other.
and growing together. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Happy Marriage also shares this really interesting anecdote about a physician who calmed an anxious patient
Oh, yeah.
by creating a placebo.
I love this story.
It's so good,
And
right?
it's such a good illustration.
So he basically gives the patient like water
Right.
with a few drops of coloring.
Just to make it look like medicine.
Yeah, but he like measures it out really carefully.
He has a big show of it.
He makes this whole like production out of it.
Right.
And, the patient's anxiety subsides.
Physically because of the doctor's demeanor.
Yes.
The way he presented it.
Confidence and the...
Right. He projected this sense of calm and control.
Yeah. And it's like this placebo effect in action.
Totally.
Like, our minds are powerful.
Our minds are powerful. Yeah.
And I remember when I was preparing for this really big presentation,
Mhm.
I was so nervous, but I just kept telling myself,
Like, you got this.
you got this.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. And it actually like helped.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. And the story, it just highlights how our demeanor and attitude can have this ripple effect on the people around us.
Mm-hmm. Like, even when we might be feeling stressed or uncertain on the inside,
Right.
projecting that sense of calm can actually help us navigate those challenging situations more effectively.
And speaking of challenges.
Biblical principles of success. It cautions against impatience,
Yeah.
using the example of the Israelites demanding a king
Right.
before God's perfect will was ready.
They were impatient.
They were so impatient.
Yeah. They wanted a quick fix.
They wanted a quick fix.
They weren't trusting in God's timing.
Right. And it's such a contrast to David,
Yeah. Who's willing to wait?
who was willing to wait and to trust,
Yeah.
even when things were really tough.
Even when it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like both sources are highlighting this importance of inner strength and resilience,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what's going on around you.
It's about cultivating that attitude
Yeah.
of insulation but never isolation, as biblical principles puts it.
I love that phrase.
It's such a good one.
It's like being in the world,
Mm.
but not of the world.
Yeah, you're engaged,
Right.
but you're not letting the world
You're not being pulled in by
Right.
all of those things.
Yeah.
And it made me think of Jesus.
You know, he was constantly surrounded by people,
Yeah.
but he never
His
compromised.
values or his mission.
Yeah, and the author of Biblical Principles of Success, he talks about this concept of table fellowship,
Oh, yeah.
which is essentially how Jesus used social gatherings as opportunities for spiritual impact.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see
Yeah.
how he navigated these complex social dynamics
Right.
while staying true to his purpose.
And I think that's such an important lesson for us today
Totally.
because we often feel that pressure
Yes.
to conform to social expectations.
Yeah.
And Jesus's example shows us that it's possible
It is.
to engage
Yeah.
without compromising,
Right.
your values.
So as we're considering these ideas of patience and attitude,
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to kind of pause and ask ourselves, like, what areas of your life require more patience?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and how can you shift your attitude to maybe better navigate challenges and cultivate stronger relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Because these qualities are closely linked to another essential ingredient for success,
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
and that is humility,
Okay.
patience, and a good attitude. It's like easier said than done right.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like when you're in the middle of a conflict or you're feeling stressed or, things aren't going your way,
Mm-hmm.
it can be so hard to take a step back
Right.
and choose patience and choose like a positive attitude.
Like, where does humility fit into all of this?
Right. That's a great question. And it's interesting because both Biblical Principles of Success and Happy Marriage, they both emphasize humility as
Yeah.
being absolutely essential for success,
Yeah.
both in our personal lives and in our relationships.
And, I think a lot of people have this misconception about humility.
Oh, yeah.
They think it's about, putting yourself down or
Yeah.
thinking you're worthless.
Like, no, I'm nothing.
Right. But that's not what it's about at all.
No, it's not about, it's about recognizing our place
Right.
in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging our dependence on God.
Mhm.
Our talents and our abilities are gifts from Him.
Right.
We're not the source of them.
And Biblical Principles of Success, the author, he contrasts King David, who was
Yes.
known for his humility, with King Hezekiah,
Mm-hmm.
who let pride kind of get the best of him.
Yeah, and Hezekiah accomplished a lot,
He did.
during his reign.
He was a good king.
He was a good king, but
he
his
had a
pride
pride.
ultimately led to his downfall.
Ultimately, yeah.
It's like that classic example.
Pride comes before the fall.
Pride comes before the fall.
Yeah.
And it's this reminder that, true success isn't just about what we achieve,
Right.
but how we achieve it.
It's about the heart.
It's about the heart
Yeah.
behind it all,
The character.
the attitude.
Yeah. And speaking of heart attitude, Biblical Principles of Success also connects humility
Mm-hmm.
to generosity.
Okay.
And the author, he really emphasizes this principle of sowing and reaping.
Yeah.
When we give generously, we open ourselves up to receiving blessings.
Right. And it's not just about financial giving.
No, it's about
Right.
Uh.
It's about giving of our time,
our time,
our resources, our talents,
love,
our love, our forgiveness.
our energy.
Yeah.
And he shares this personal story in the book about how he overcame financial struggles
By embracing this principle of giving.
by embracing this principle of giving. And
Yeah.
it makes you wonder if sometimes holding back,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's our time or our resources or our forgiveness,
Yeah.
if it's actually limiting our own growth.
We're actually blocking
Yeah.
the blessings
Yeah.
that God wants to pour out on us.
It's almost like we're putting up these walls
Right.
and saying nope, I'm going to hold on to this.
Yeah.
When really the more we
The
give,
more we
the more we open ourselves up
Mhm.
to receiving.
Absolutely.
So how does humility play out in the context of marriage?
Well, happy marriage really stresses the importance of selflessness.
Okay.
Putting your spouse's needs before your own.
Yeah.
And they have this really interesting section
Okay.
about what they call spiritual affinity.
Spiritual affinity.
Have you ever heard of that term?
I haven't. Tell me more.
Okay. So spiritual affinity is essentially when you develop emotional attachments
Okay.
outside of your marriage.
So not physical.
Not necessarily physical.
Okay.
It could just be an emotional connection with
Yeah.
someone else.
Got it.
And the book argues that these types of attachments,
Mm-hmm.
they can be just as damaging to a marriage as physical infidelity
Wow.
because they erode trust and intimacy.
So it's like you're giving a part of yourself
Right.
emotionally to someone else.
Exactly. And you're creating this division
Yeah.
within your marriage.
So it's about guarding your heart. and being intentional about, like,
Where you invest your energy.
yeah, where you're investing your emotional energy.
Absolutely.
And happy marriage, it offers some really practical advice
Oh, yeah.
on how to cultivate humility
Mhm.
and selflessness within marriage.
Yeah, like learning to respond to conflict with a soft answer
Right.
rather than reacting defensively.
I remember there's this section where the wife is like, my husband comes home in a bad mood,
Hmm.
and I always get caught up in this argument with him.
Right? Like, how do I
How do
deal
I
with this?
not do this?
Yeah.
And the advice is like, turn to God in
Mm.
those moments.
Ask for help.
Ask for help.
Ask for strength
Yeah.
to respond differently.
And that's a great example of how humility isn't always about these grand gestures.
Right.
It's about those small daily choices.
Those little moments
Little moments, yeah.
where we choose to put others' needs before our own.
Yeah, so we've talked about defining true success, the importance of patience and a good attitude,
Yeah.
and this idea of humility.
Uh-huh.
Is there a thread that ties all of these concepts together?
I think the thread is this recognition that we're not self-sufficient.
Mm,
True success, whether it's in our personal lives
right.
or our relationships, requires acknowledging our dependence on God
Right.
and His grace.
It's like surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. And that leads us to our final overarching theme,
Okay.
the power of God's presence.
Oh, I feel like this is where it all comes together.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
All these principles we've been talking about,
Yeah.
they're all rooted in this idea
Mm-hmm.
that God's presence is transformative.
Both biblical principles of success and happy marriage,
Yeah.
they point to this power of God's presence
Mm-hmm.
as being fundamental to living a truly fulfilling life.
Whether you're talking about individual fulfillment or
Yeah.
relational fulfillment.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And biblical principles of success, it takes us on this fascinating journey through the Old Testament tabernacle
Oh, yeah.
and the symbolism of the Ark of the Covenant.
All this rich imagery
Right.
pointing to God's presence.
And how it was once confined
Mhm.
to a specific physical space.
But now,
Through
through Christ, it's
or something
accessible.
current.
It's accessible to all believers.
to everyone.
Yeah.
And the author, he highlights the torn veil
Uh-huh.
at Jesus's crucifixion
Yeah.
as this powerful symbol.
That barrier is removed
That barrier is removed.
Yeah.
It's this new era.
of intimacy and access to God.
Yeah, it's no longer about like
Trying to earn it
trying to earn it.
or perform rituals.
It's about relationship.
It's about relationship.
Yeah, and happy marriage, it emphasizes that cultivating God's presence within marriage
Mm-hmm.
is foundational to a strong, lasting relationship.
Right. It's not just about,
The two people.
the two people.
Mm.
It's about inviting God
Inviting God into that space.
into that space.
Yeah. And there's this really practical piece of advice
Oh, yeah.
about making time for daily prayer as a couple.
And they really emphasize that it's not just about
Asking for things.
asking for things right.
Right.
It's about creating that space
To connect.
to connect with God
Yeah. And to allow him to work in your hearts,
in your
in
relationship.
your relationship.
Yeah.
It's like inviting God into the conversation
Mm,
and acknowledging that he's the ultimate source of wisdom and guidance.
absolutely.
And I found it really interesting in biblical principles of success.
Yeah.
There's this brief mention
Okay.
of Moses's desire to see God's glory.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just about experiencing God's presence. It's
No.
like this deeper level of intimacy.
It's like he wanted more.
He wanted more.
Yeah, he wanted to see
He wanted to see.
the fullness of God's glory.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, how can we cultivate a greater awareness of God's presence in our everyday lives?
That's a great question.
How can we go beyond just like, acknowledging that he's there,
Right.
but really like experiencing his presence?
Mm-hmm.
And how might that transform our relationships, our pursuit of, true success?
How would our lives look different
How would our lives look different?
if we were more tuned in
Yes.
to God's presence?
And I think that's a great question
Yeah.
to leave our listeners with.
It's been amazing exploring these sources with you.
It's been so fascinating.
These connections are just blowing my mind.
Me too. It's like these unexpected connections and this timeless wisdom that we can glean from these seemingly, different texts.
Right. It just shows you that, the truth is multifaceted.
Yeah. And there's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
And knowledge is most valuable when we share it.
Hmm.
and when we apply it to our lives.
So let's take these insights
Yes,
and make them practical.
let's go out there and live them out.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.